In 1965, reports developed about a person in pain trapped deep underground in a cold, wet crevice, which caused the nation's attention to become fixated on the life-or-death struggle of Morris Baetzold inside Wildcat Cave. Viewer discretion is definitely advised for this video. Morris Baetzold, 15, a ward of Cleveland, Ohio, lived in a Methodist children's home with his brother Donald. The boys lived in foster homes most of their life since their parents were divorced in 1955. Their parents tried their best to care for the boys, but the brothers rarely saw their parents unless something significant happened. However, their bond was very tight, and they dreamed of someday building a company together and starting their own families. Donald was a father figure and friend to Morris. They liked to go out on adventures together and had a great time exploring outside a cave near the boys' home called Wildcat Cave. The brothers originally went to the cave because Morris continually needed new spots to smoke cigarettes. He started smoking when he was 13 and became hooked shortly after. Morris claimed that the nicotine helped him cope with the stresses of living in a boys' home, and that habit ended up allowing him to bond more with his brother. The issue with Morris's habit was that it was forbidden by the Methodist children's home where he lived, and he had been caught once or twice by teachers. You're supposed to get kicked out if you smoke, and he has been warned that if he gets caught one more time, he would get kicked out. Morris thought that if he was in a group inside the cave and they got caught smoking, the teachers couldn't prove that he was the one smoking. So he went to Wildcat Cave and tried it out, and to his surprise, the plan worked perfectly, but he almost got lost on his way out. He would have been in serious trouble if he hadn't had a flashlight on him, and this experience made him consider never going back to that cave. Wildcat Cave is a natural formation on a sandstone bluff. The entrance measures about 15 feet wide and 4 feet tall, which leads to a narrow passage that runs about 80 feet before opening up into a large chamber. The outside of the cave and the opening around it was really popular with locals. The cave mostly had visitors in the warmer months. There were stories about dangerous and dark things happening inside the cave, so most people were scared to enter. The cave has a long history that includes a haven for criminals and anyone evading capture in the area. Local tradition states it was a 19th century hiding place for escaped enslaved people en route to Canada. Even back then, a quick exploration inside the cave made it clear that severe injury or entrapment could occur due to all of the meandering tunnels, steep drop-offs, razor-sharp formations, running water, and freezing temperatures inside. Over time, Morris forgot about the cave and decided that there were safer places to smoke and hopefully not get caught. So on October 5th, 1965, Morris, along with 16 others from the children's home and 3 teachers, went on a trip to visit Schoenbrunn Village, but the bus got a flat tire along the way. The delay forced the organizers to divert the trip to a new location, and they decided to choose the nearby Wildcat Cave. Morris couldn't believe the news when he heard this, because he immediately thought about entering the cave to sneak a cigarette with his friends. His group of friends were all thinking the same thing, so the mood amongst the group was electric as they parked near the cave. The teacher could see the shift in energy with the boys, and he wasn't sure why they were so happy to visit the cave, so he decided to pay extra close attention to them as they walked away from the bus. Morris led his friends up the rocky cliffs en route to the cave. One of Morris's friends eventually found the cave and yelled for the group to meet outside it. The cave's entrance gaped like a dark, jagged mouth. Morris and his 2 friends crouched down and crept inside the entrance. As the boys moved deeper inside the damp, cold passage, the space grew tighter above and around them. His 2 friends were smaller than him, and they could quickly work their way down the claustrophobic tunnels. Morris was uncomfortable with how much twisting and turning he had to do to catch them. He was starting to acquire cuts and scratches on his body from pulling and contorting his way through. He could faintly hear his friends yelling, but he couldn't see anything inside the dank-smelling cave. He yelled out to his friends to ask where they were, but he couldn't tell which direction they were going. It was pitch black, cold, and constricting in the cave, but worst of all, by then, Morris was all alone. His body was in pain from all of the squeezing through all the sharp passages, and he had a full-on panic attack. His heart started beating rapidly, and Morris wanted to get out of that cave and back to daylight. He was only 110 pounds, 5'7", but the passages were getting very small. He pushed himself through quickly to escape the cave faster. For the time being, his panic attack subsided, but he feared another one might come back. Meanwhile, his friends were able to make it out of the cave, and they figured Morris had gotten out before them. They were lucky to make it out of the cave without a flashlight. But Morris was still stuck in the cave and found himself in a passage that led to a dead end. He saw a small crevice at the end of the passage and 2 boulders on both sides of the aperture. He would have to go in between the boulders head first and down into the crevice. He got around the boulders and started wiggling his way through the cold, wet, slippery crack. He was almost upside down and blood started pooling to his upper body. To make things worse, one of the boulders shifted while he was making his way into the crevice, which sealed Morris in the crack. Morris was unaware how the boulder had trapped him, but he knew the rock shifting was bad. This scared him, and he realized he needed to get out of that crevice. Morris squirmed in the crack, but every time he moved, his body would get more stuck with no space to pivot or even reverse. Finally, he tried to exhale the air in his chest to fit through the opening. Instead, he was stuck, tilted downward at a 45-degree angle in a crack only 10 inches wide and 3 feet high. It was about the size of the opening of a clothes dryer. Soon his body was pinned entirely and he could not move any part of it. He yelled as loud as he could, but the sound went nowhere. Only his feet were sticking out, and the only way to reach him was from behind. About 30 minutes had passed and Morris was still stuck in the tight passage. He started to question all of the decisions that led him to this point and prayed his friends would come to find him. He had no idea where he was in the cave, and he knew that it would be hard for anyone to get this deep in the cave and make it through those super tight passages. It just didn't seem possible for him to get saved, and with a headache starting to form from the blood pooling towards the upper part of his body, he began to cry. He thought about his brother and that he might never see him again. After an hour, Morris's friends knew that they likely had to find him and that he was probably stuck in the cave. They told the teacher that they went deep into the cave and they lost Morris. The teacher, William Powell, was not much larger than Morris and decided to enter the cave with the 2 boys to go find him. They made their way into the cave, and after going down many of the passages, they finally got to Morris's feet. William took off his belt, tied it around Morris's feet, and tried to pull him out. He tugged hard and slowly pulled Morris up. Then the belt snapped and Morris fell even deeper inside. When the belt broke, it caused Morris's face to smash into the rock hard and cut his face open. Morris screamed in pain and couldn't believe that this just happened to him. Without any other way to free Morris, William left the cave with the 2 boys and called for rescue. The first rescuers who got to the cave were massive guys who didn't want to get stuck themselves, so they couldn't really do anything. One of the rescuers entered the cave and stayed with Morris, intending to speak with him so he would remain conscious. He would repeatedly ask Morris if he was awake and told him he needed to stay conscious. Sometimes when Morris would not respond, the rescuer would do his best to make a lot of noise and say irritating things to him just to try to get a response. More rescuers arrived on the scene, and Fire Chief Paul Chodera led a squad to the cave to set up a pulley system inside to yank Morris out. Unfortunately, the pulley system was ineffective, and the rescuers could not extract Morris with the hooks they latched around his feet. The rescuers realized that this would not be a quick rescue, and Morris was at serious risk of becoming hypothermic, unable to breathe due to lack of oxygen, and die. Then, firefighters installed a portable generator to light the cave and crews piped oxygen inside. The weather outside was nearly freezing, but inside the cave it was a bit warmer. Portable heaters were dragged near Morris to help keep him warm. He was wearing a nylon jacket and jeans, which actually did help out a little bit. Several members of the fire department and its rescue squad threaded their way to Morris and reassured him that they were going to get him out. They attempted to use a wooden plank to try to lift him out, but that didn't work. There was too much rock in the way. Contractors offered to drill through 36 feet of stone, but geologists feared a cave-in. They thought about using dynamite, but that would just be too dangerous and it could instantly kill Morris. The temperature dipped into the 30s as more than 200 emergency rescuers, spectators, relatives, and reporters gathered at the scene. As day turned to night, local volunteers supplied hot coffee, soup, and chili to the rescuers. In addition, the American Red Cross and Salvation Army set up camp outside. The story of the trapped kid became front-page news across the country and the subject of national television programs. Radio broadcasts asked for help from little people. So Evelyn Petit, a 5'2", 85 foot-pound nurse from Akron, drove to the cave and wriggled her way into the passage. She couldn't get any closer than 5 feet to Morris, but spent nearly 3 hours comforting him. Experienced cave explorer Terry Brown of Akron rigged an impromptu pulley with a metal rig spiked to the cave's roof. Rescuers pulled and tugged as Morris screamed in pain, but he only moved a few inches. Morris was sure he was going to die at this point, and with the amount of pain he was in, he was not sure how long he was going to be able to stay conscious. The rescuers figured as soon as Morris lost consciousness, he would die. All night long, rescuers kept trying to keep Morris awake. Finally, they promised him a steak dinner and made him count to 25 and back again over and over. Strangers who heard the radio cast showed up and attempted different methods to reach Morris. In the morning, the U.S. Air Force flew a team from the National Speleological Society in Washington, D.C. At this point, Morris had gone more than 24 hours without food or water. The rescuers were surprised that Morris was still alive and knew that it could be his moment at any time. Machinist Curtis Peck and his uncle Paul Peck devised a plan to put loops of rope over Morris and pour a glycerin solution on him to make him slippery and then lift him out on a support board. Akron firefighters Jim and Robert Howd designed the straps. They worked through the night and finally managed to get the straps around Morris to begin a slow process of inching his body out of the crack. Workers repeatedly could lift Morris about 4 inches at a time, but he would slip back when the pull on the straps was eased. The next day, cave experts of the National Rescue Squad arrived at the Cleveland Hopkins Airport and were given a police escort to the scene. Rescuers could reach and grab Morris, but like all previous attempts, they couldn't move him more than a few inches. Lester Zimmerman, chief of the Division of Mines of Ohio, said he didn't think drilling through to the boy was feasible because the cave's ceiling was weak. As he headed for work that morning, Andrew Ulrich, like thousands of Cleveland listeners, heard that all attempts failed to rescue the 15-year-old Morris. Andrew thought of his sons, Mike and Jerry, safe at home, probably just eating breakfast. He was almost at his office when he read in the newspaper how Morris only had hope if someone small but strong was able to rescue him. Andy instantly thought about his sons, so Andy made a U-turn and headed for home. He asked his sons, and Mike and Jerry didn't hesitate to agree to try to help Morris. Seconds later, they were driving to the cave. Though the chief was worried about sending young children into the cave to help, he was desperate for someone small enough to reach in that crevice. Nothing was working so far. 15-year-old Mike convinced the fire chief to let him try. He was a tall, skinny boy with long arms and legs. Secured with straps and ropes and a metal clamp tucked into his pocket, he made his way, wriggling like a snake. It was slow going as he lowered himself until he finally touched Morris. Hanging upside down, Mike managed to fish the clamp out of his pocket and fashion a strap around Morris's leg. Knotting a rope through the strap, he backed out of the cave. He yelled to the rescue team and they started to pull the rope. Morris moved about 2 inches, but that was all. They suggested Mike leave the cave, but he offered to go back in and yelled to Morris that they'll get him. Luckily, those 2 inches made it possible to put a rope around both of his legs, and then Mike backed out again and told the rescuers to pull. Further down the cave, the rescue team pulled the rope, and now Morris was shouting with happiness. His legs and hips were free, and his right arm was no longer wedged underneath him. The issue now was that his chest was clamped in that stone. He was in a strange position, and it was hard for him to breathe. His lungs couldn't fully expand, and he felt he couldn't get a breath. Finally, he started to panic and screamed for the rescuers to help. Mike was beginning to doubt Morris would ever get out of the crack, but he wouldn't give up as long as Morris was still alive. For the third time, Mike Ulrich wriggled back into the cave. This time he was able to get another strap under Morris's arm, but once again the team tugged at the ropes and slowly Morris, scratched, arching and exhausted, was pulled further out. They yanked as hard as they could and they got him out the furthest they had yet, but he was still stuck. Morris had never felt so alone and helpless. His right arm, tingling in pain, was pinned under him. He could still not move. The rescuers yelled to Morris to keep his hopes up and that they would never stop trying to get him out. While tugging on the rope, Mike lost his footing and fell into the pitch darkness. He yelled for help from the other rescuers and tumbled headfirst into the crack near the side of the boulder blocking Morris. By 6 a.m., Morris was sure he was going to die in this cold, dark tomb. The rescuers were able to get Mike out of the crack, and Mike threw a rope on Morris and was able to pull it over his arms. Morris lay on his right side and could use only one arm. Mike continued to yank on the rope and had the rescuers yank as well. He slipped a few more times, but with some firm pulling from the rescuers, he and the rescuers yanked Morris out of the crack enough to grab him with their hands. He was basically out. Mike went in there and grabbed Morris with his hands and gave him to a rescuer, and they continued to pull him out. Unbelievably, Morris was out of the crack. Finally, they escorted Morris out of the cave. Everyone was cheering as Morris was wrapped in a blanket and brought out of the cave. He was trapped inside for about 26 hours. Hundreds of spectators applauded while Morris was loaded into a waiting ambulance. For his courage, Mike Ulrich was awarded the Bronze Medal of Honor by the Carnegie Hero Fund Commission. Rescuer Miles Lee said an ordinary man would have given up or died long before the rescue. However, tears ran down his face as he finally helped get Morris out of that crack. He's not the type to cry, but this was an extremely emotional moment. Morris was taken to the Medina Community Hospital where he was treated for exhaustion, a big cut on his cheek, and cuts and bruises to his arms and legs. Later, Morris said that he didn't think he was going to get out of the cave alive and that he felt hopeless up until the last minute he was rescued. He also mentioned once he got out, he was dying for a cigarette. The Park Service dynamited the entrance to Wildcat Cave hours after Morris was freed. Eventually, the entrance was permanently sealed with concrete, so no kid could ever get stuck there again. Thanks for watching the video, and subscribe if you like the content. As always, please be extra nice to the like button, and I have many other disaster videos on my channel that you might want to check out. See you at the next one.